have 16 centres where people can go and test a drug without getting arrested for possessing it. And they can then find out what they're taking, and they can also be given a piece of paper which tells them what the harms are likely to be. So people can actually have a rational approach to drugs. We suggested that. We suggested talking to the Dutch last year when I was chair of the ACMD, and the government said, we can't possibly do that. You know, crazy people. What about replacing alcohol with a safer alcohol? There's going to be a very interesting Channel 4 documentary on that coming up soon, where we actually test that hypothesis in a controlled experiment. And maybe you could make safer forms of it. If you're worried that MDMA is actually hurting people, why not make a safe MDMA? It might be possible, I don't know. But would it be allowed? If kids liked it, it would probably get banned. And then the value of the safety would probably... So there are some radical solutions. And I'll just finish then. So I was sacked. Despite what people like to say, I didn't resign. I was sacked. But I didn't give up. I've set up my own committee, the Independent Scientific Committee on Drugs. 7 of the members of that committee resigned from the ACMD. So we've got the core of the ACMD science and educationists. One of them is here now, Patrick. Was in a charity, the Centre for Crime and Justice Studies. We have a website which is a truly non-partisan, politically independent site telling the truth about drugs. And if you want to read what I think, you can go onto my blog site at wordpress.com, and every couple of weeks I put a new blog on there, sort of expressing some more of my concerns about issues like alcohol and cannabis, etc. So they're quite short articles, but they're all referenced. So I'm trying to sort of put science into blogging. And I'll stop now. I'll thank you, take questions, and leave you with a couple of extremely seminal quotes from 2 of the great thinkers in the past. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Well, thank you, David. I think the size of the audience and the applause there actually reflects the interest and your entertaining, thought-provoking and factful lecture that we've given. I'm sure you'll be willing to take a few questions. We have 2 roving microphones, so please can people wait until the microphone gets to you. So there's one just by the microphone person here.
Yeah, what do you think the influence is on is a vested interest as far as drug policy goes? For instance, if cannabis was legalized, anybody would be able to grow it in their own home and the government wouldn't be able to tax it for that reason.
Well, I mean, actually, cannabis is interesting because, yes, there is no tax currently, so there wouldn't be any particular change in terms of the government income. I mean, it's been suggested that it could be legalized specifically to increase taxation. That was one of the major arguments in favor of Proposition 19 in California. The big lobby against cannabis legalization is the alcohol industry. They're absolutely terrified. The tobacco industry is quite in favor because they've already taken out all the copyrights on all the best names, you know, Lebanese Black and that. Marlboro own those, but yeah, it's true. So, yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question. What would happen if cannabis was as available as alcohol? Nowhere in the world does that happen. There's no culture where that is the case. California, is getting close to it. But there is another way of looking at it, which is what happens where neither are legal. And that's true in most Islamic countries. And there's been a recent World Health Organization survey in Morocco where they looked at the incidence of alcohol dependence and cannabis dependence in the country which grows some of the best cannabis in the world. And alcohol dependence in Morocco, 3.4% of the population, and cannabis dependence, 2.7%. So even when it's very easy to get, it doesn't seem to cause any more problems than alcohol.
Is there a question up there at the back?
Hello there. A little bit of common experience. I have advised the government as a veterinary advisor from within the civil service, so I've had even less latitude than you to break the party line. I subsequently left and went and studied social sciences, and to my horror or surprise, discovered there that within social sciences, knowledge or truth is considered to be a very different product and formed in a very different manner from the way expert knowledge is, which is the sort of knowledge you've talked about. Now, this, I think, is the fundamental heart of the problem here, that sometimes governments want to take on board expert knowledge, sometimes they don't. Sometimes society wants to believe expert knowledge, other times it doesn't. It's the same with GM crops. The public will not believe that GM crops are safe. The public will not believe that nuclear waste is safe. Is not the problem here that the socially constructed, i.e. the publicly perceived harms, potential harms of drugs, are very, very different from what you are categorising them as, and therefore how politicians need to respond to that is to look at the socially constructed points of view.
Well, I have no doubt that you're right, that there are a lot of people who don't know the meaning of the word evidence. I had an amazing conversation on Radio Northern Ireland about 2 weeks ago when we were talking about drug policy, and I was saying what I was saying about what we've done, and on the other side, this woman called Kathy Gingle was saying, well, look, my evidence is as good as his. My evidence is what I feel. And I suppose fundamentally it reflects the fact that there's this huge problem with scientific ignorance in this country. People just do not understand what the nature of evidence is. And you know, we have to work continuously to make sure that the facts, as I would see them, are out there. And eventually it'll cave. I think the media, this is fun for them. I don't actually think the newspapers really care either way, but they just know this is a wonderful a rod with which to beat the government. They just stir cannabis in air, and politicians jump. You know, it's one of the things they can do to tease government. And I think if we could stop that, a lot of it will fall into place.
Other questions? There's one here. Just here.
Thank you for your interesting talk. It seems a little strange to me that you're promoting cannabis because...
I'm not promoting anything.
Well,
I'm
I mean,
against all
each
drugs.
to their own, and
a rational view about how
each
we
to their
assess
own,
drugs.
in my opinion, so long as they do it in moderation and they're careful and they're in good, safe company. I just wondered why you've chosen cannabis, because the next stage for a lot of kids would be that psychiatry would get a hold of them once they've explored spiritual aspects of their brain or whatever. Psychiatry would distort that into a lifelong psychiatric condition, wouldn't it?
Well,
Which
I think
is
that's one
the
of the
job
dangers.
that you do. Why have you actually chosen cannabis to...
What to make the discussion about? Well, because cannabis is the most commonly used intoxicant after alcohol. That's why. And that's why we have to have that debate, because we are criminalising more and more young people. I mean, you literally, in London tube stations, there would be police with sniffer dogs at the top of the escalators, and they would sniff people who were just going home from work or from college. They'd sniff them, and they'd find cannabis, and then they'd take them away. And that was filling the need for the police to achieve targets, but it was criminalising a lot of young people for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Yeah?
Sorry, it was just...
You better let other people speak, because...
In your bar charts of illnesses, it was actually psychiatry that takes up most of the cost of the government.
No, that's not true.
To
That's
heal
absolutely
people.
not true. And one of the really... I haven't had time to decompose all the data, but the damage that alcohol does to families, the hidden damage in terms of spousal abuse, in terms of child abuse, in terms of child neglect, is enormous. And the ACMD reviewed that very, very systematically twice. And that's where the real cost of drug harms is, in terms of the damage it does to families. There's no family in Britain that hasn't been damaged by alcohol. There's very few that have been damaged by cannabis.
Yes, I was very interested to hear what you said about the reasons why people use drugs, the pleasure, suffering. I was involved for several years with a group which were carers, mostly for young people suffering mental health problems, psychosis. And it became clear through all the conversations that though many of the young people had used drugs, it was nearly always the symptoms of distress predated the drug use. And I began to wonder, I became convinced that many of these young people were taking the drugs because, if I can put it this way, they wanted to be out of their heads. In their heads was not a good place to be.
Indeed, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And that's why I find it really offensive that we blame them. You know, there's a philosophy now that cannabis causes schizophrenia, and as I say, it's the user's fault, and it's completely absurd. And the reason it happened, of course, is that we know so little about what causes schizophrenia that people will cling on to the tiniest straw.
There's a question up here.
In the wake of the evidence that you've just provided, why do you not support the legalization of all drugs?
Well, because what I've shown you is that alcohol's legal and it's the most damaging. Why is it the most damaging? It's the most damaging because it's the most widely used. So legalization, if drugs were freely marketed, then we would have more problems, I'm pretty sure. But if legal, so there's some kind of halfway house where, as I've said, I believe in decriminalising personal use, which some people would say is legalising, but it's decriminalising. And I think we should allow some kind of regulated access to drugs that are less harmful than alcohol. That's my approach. But I don't think a free market in drugs would be, well, I'm sure it would be more dangerous.
We've got a question down here.
Yeah. What drugs have you done, and what's your favourite?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you. I've done very little. I mean, I've never been a smoker. My favourite drug is alcohol, and I try to moderate what I take there. I did a little bit of cannabis, a little bit of speed when I was younger, but I'm not very drug experienced.
Actually, we have to be out here, unfortunately, by about now, and I think that's a perfect point to stop, because we are going to take David out for a meal, and he is going to have some alcohol, and we'll discuss it more. But I think the interest that everybody has shown here shows that it's actually something we all have an opinion about, and I hope you're going away today with a slightly changed opinion on the basis of facts that David's been able to tell us about. It's a story that's bound to run and run, and I'm sure you'll be seeing a lot more of David in the news in the years to come. So can we just thank him again for this evening?
Thank you very much.